Thanksgiving week, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. I know that many of you that are listeners, viewers to our show are also teachers, so if you've got a week off this week for the holidays, or if you've got a different kind of job that's provided you a little vacation week this week, we appreciate you sharing it with us. We'll try to make good use of your time as we head towards Saturday. Clean, old-fashioned hate against Georgia Tech. A lot of Dog fans excited about seeing the Dogs back between the hedges on Saturday with a chance to end what has unfortunately been a two-game losing streak to Georgia Tech in Athens. We'll talk about all of that over the course of the program. Off the top today, by the way, wait till you hear what a former Georgia player, our buddy Cameron Nislek, the former Georgia punter, he said it on the Northside Hospital postgame show on Saturday about what Kirby Smart's true feelings might actually be about Georgia Tech and why he thinks the Dogs be more than ready for what's going to happen this Saturday between the hedges. We're glad you're with us. Chip Tower is also coming up here today as well. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, and it begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Looking forward to Georgia Tech on Saturday. Cannot wait to see the Bulldogs close out the 2018 regular season in style. We'll talk a lot about Georgia and Georgia Tech and the rivalry known as clean, old-fashioned hate here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza this week, and it is so great to have you with us for all of that. Let me begin the week by setting the tone in what I believe is a very appropriate way. Our buddy, Cameron Nislek, the former Georgia punter, our co-host this year for home games at the UGA bookstore on the Northside Hospital postgame show, as we turned our attention on Saturday after Georgia's win against UMass to Georgia Tech. Cameron Nislek, a guy who brings the experience of having been in the locker room with Kirby Smart, who brings the experience of having been around this Georgia team in 2017, says, listen, when it comes to the Dogs and the Jackets, there's one thing you need to know about Kirby Smart. He feels exactly a way about the Jackets as you would imagine a Georgia alumnus would, and you better believe this team's going to have its chin strap buckled up tight to take on Georgia Tech. Here's how Cameron Nislek said it. This is a great way to get our week going.
Just a little peek behind the curtain. Kirby Smart hates Georgia Tech. Throughout the season, they actually, once a week or so, they do a little period for Georgia Tech. Even though we're not playing them, they focus a little bit on Georgia Tech every week. So it's something that we prepare for, the option, so that when it comes down to the last game of the season, we're ready for it.
I think that's really interesting. And Kirby Smart we play a lot of the audio here on DawgNation Daily, but he has, over the last couple of years, talked about that from time to time. He doesn't mention Tech by name very much, but he'll say during the summer, during off weeks, during lead-ups to the season, hey, we spent some time working on future opponents. I've always assumed that the future opponent in question there might be Georgia Tech because it is so different. Cameron Nislek says Kirby hates Georgia Tech. I would imagine as a coach that graduated from Georgia, now coaching for his alma mater, he probably does. We've seen some evidence over the last couple of weeks that he probably also hates Florida and Auburn as well. I told you a couple of weeks ago that I think that's a pretty good spot for a Dog fan to find himself in right now, knowing that he's got a coach who, for those of us who grew up as children of the 80s, when Georgia always finished its season by playing Florida, Auburn, Georgia Tech, kind of a weird tradition of playing your three biggest rivals in 3 consecutive games to close out the year. Kirby Smart, who also grew up in that same era, well, you know what? He feels exactly the way about those rivals that you think he might. I would also add to what Cameron Nislek says there, I also think that Kirby Smart probably hates more than anything else, Georgia Tech included. He probably hates lack of preparation. Kirby Smart hates lack of preparedness. He wants his team to be fully focused in on the task at hand, and for something that's as different as Georgia Tech is, and we'll hear more about Kirby Smart on that subject in a moment, for something that's as different as Georgia Tech is, Kirby Smart's probably looking to find some ways to make sure they are plugged in and ready to go when this Thanksgiving week rivalry game rolls around. With that in mind, Kirby Smart did talk about this subject a bit during his post-game press conference after Georgia's 66-27 win against UMass on Saturday. Kirby Smart was asked, like Cameron Nislek said, that they do go out and do this just about every week. Kirby Smart was asked, is that true? Do you guys actually prepare a little bit each week for Georgia Tech? Kirby Smart said, kind of, but not really. Here's Kirby.
We can't practice every week. We got too much stuff to do. We try to work on it in the off week. We work on it in the off season. We work on it during the season on some Mondays when we feel like we've got a simpler game plan for whoever we're playing. But it's hard to do every week. We do a lot of weeks to keep it fresh in our kids' mind. And you got to remember, they're like doctorate experts at it, and we're 1 week a year. You got to be smart about what you do, and you got to sell your team on playing the right way against it.
I should probably take a moment here to explain that the that Kirby Smart keeps referencing is that Georgia Tech triple option offense, which a couple teams in college football do run. Army's run it to great success this season. We saw them take Oklahoma to overtime earlier in the year. Ken Niumatalolo, the coach at Navy, has who followed in Paul Johnson's footsteps there. Not exactly a great year for the midshipmen this year, but it's been a great offense for years and years. They also run this triple option offense as well. You see it pop up from other places from time to time, but what Georgia Tech runs, at least at the major college, Power 5, ACC, SEC level, is incredibly different. So Kirby Smart, when he references it there, that's what he's talking about, that triple option offense. In fact, it's so different, even if Kirby won't quite admit to practicing against it each and every week, at least in some form or fashion. One thing he did admit on Saturday is something that he normally does do post-game, he didn't do this week. The idea that a lot of coaches follow of the 24-hour rule of take a moment to celebrate and appreciate what just happened, and then after 24 hours, whether it was a win or a loss, let's start moving ahead. Kirby Smart said the preparation and the task of moving ahead to Georgia Tech actually begins before the 24 hours after the last game is even over. Here's Kirby again.
As soon as I can turn that tape on, I'll be turning it on because it's very different for us. So most of the time I try to have a 24-hour rule too. This one's different because you don't have enough time to prepare for them. I mean, you never have enough time. You always feel crammed preparing for this offense because you so rarely see it.
Yeah, you so rarely see it, and as Kirby Smart explains, when you do see it, and I think for those of us who think we follow football closely, I think we have an idea of what we think this is and what makes it different from other offenses. There's been enough examples over the years of seeing this thing in action to say, well, this is how it differs from what Georgia sees on a regular basis, including teams like, say, Auburn, that like to run the football and like to use at least some option concepts for that. Kirby Smart says, no, even if you think you know why the Georgia Tech offense is different, it's actually even more different than you realize, more from Kirby.
I think you see across the country, if you watch teams play the triple option, it's extremely different and so extreme that I don't think you guys even understand. I mean, there's not one call in our defense that we play. The only common theme is you have to tackle the man with the ball. That's the only common thing. But outside that, it's nothing like it. So, you don't cry over it. You say it's a challenge, and when you get issued a challenge, that you're getting ready to play a team that's, I don't know how many games they've won in a row, 4 or 5. I don't know. They've won a lot of games in a row. They're playing really well at a high level and playing better on defense, and they're really coming together at the right time. I mean, they're beating some good teams, and it's hard to prepare for, and it's hard to stop.
There's a couple of really interesting things that I think that Kirby Smart brings up there in that comment. First of all, as I said a little earlier, if I didn't say it, I meant to, the Techs actually played much better here over the course of the last few weeks than it did over the first few weeks of the season. Near the beginning of the year, they lost at South Florida, kind of an ugly, bad loss. As of late, though, they've been racking up some wins. Beat Virginia Tech, for instance. Beat Miami. Beat some teams that athletically probably more talented than the Jackets. Georgia Tech's played a little bit better here as of late. I also like the fact that Kirby Smart says, listen, this is not the kind of thing that we're going to cry about, worry about having to go and face a different kind of offense for 1 week. We're going to embrace that challenge. And if you're a Georgia fan, you do appreciate that about Smart and these Dogs, that whatever the challenge is, whether it be the following week against the number 1 team in the country in Alabama or this week against maybe the strangest team in the country, whatever the challenge is, this is something that Kirby Smart and these Georgia players are going to do what they've done every week for the last couple of years, which is go to work hard in practice every single day and be physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually as prepared as possible for the game the following Saturday. That's exactly what you like about Georgia. On the lines of Georgia Tech, though, there is the unique challenge of, as we've spoken about before, Georgia is among the youngest teams in the country. A lot of freshmen and sophomores populate the two deep on both offense and defense. And on the defensive side of the ball especially, young players means a lot of the guys who will be playing in this game have not actually faced the Tech triple option offense in a game before, which makes the practice work even more important this week. And Kirby Smart also talked about that on Saturday.
It would be a challenge for us because we were very fortunate to inherit defensive players that had played against it when we got here. So there were, I think, 8 or 9 guys who had played against that offense for 3 straight years out there last year. And familiarity with that offense is critical. And we got a lot of guys that haven't played against it.
So listen, let me bottom line this entire discussion. I love a lot of what Kirby Smart said there. I thought what Cameron Isaac said on our Northside Hospital postgame show was fascinating. Kirby Smart's true feelings. This is about hatred for him, which would fit in perfectly for a rivalry that's known as clean old-fashioned hate. And I guess I probably feel the need to say this as well. Many of you hear me every day talk about my distaste as a Georgia fan for Florida. You know that I believe that the world's largest outdoor cocktail party is Georgia's supreme #1 rivalry. That doesn't mean, though, that I don't view clean old-fashioned hate as being a very important rivalry for UGA. I think it's a lot of fun. What I believe is going to make this game this Saturday in particular quite fun for UGA fans is that the Georgia coaching staff has been busy at work, as Cameron alluded to and Kirby Smart also partially acknowledged, to make sure this team is fully ready, not looking ahead to what might be coming after that, but focused in on ending what has been, unfortunately, a losing streak to Georgia Tech in Athens and keeping what is now a winning streak for Georgia, what hopes to become one after the win in 2017 in Atlanta. The bottom line is Georgia's going to be ready. Dog fans will get a chance to see that. In between the hedges on Saturday should be a lot of fun. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Hello to you. Thanks for being with us here today, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form, wherever you find podcasts, including we post the show every day to the world-famous DawgNation.com. We really appreciate you being with us. Huge thanks to Marco's Pizza for making it all possible. Of course, you know by now that Marco's is the pizza MVP of Primo Pizza. It's dough-made fresh daily, an original sauce recipe, and 3 signature cheeses that make every bite magnifico. Order yours today from Marcos.com. Marco's Pizza, always an awesome choice. We also want to go around the doghouse. It's Chip Towers later on. We've got some really good stuff to get into with Chip. Behind-the-scenes stories from the Georgia locker room on Saturday night. Chip will give us that. Before that, though, it is Around the Doghouse time. Here on this Monday, brought to you by Pella Window and Door. And unfortunately, I hate to do this, but I guess our Around the Doghouse today, presented by Pella Window and Door, is going to center around some bad news. We don't know the full story on this yet, but you better believe I've got my antenna up for what this could mean. Georgia linebacker Monty Rice, who I personally believe, even among those really talented freshmen that we've seen kind of pop in there, we've seen a lot of Adam Anderson, for instance, as of late, but even amongst that entire group of really talented freshmen, I think when it comes down to Georgia's best run-stopping linebacker, I just believe that Monty Rice is that guy. And Monty Rice was not seen, in action early on in the game on Saturday. And then if you're watching on video, you can see this. Monty Rice was then later seen on the sideline, not in uniform, in crutches. Now, what was confusing to a lot of people is that Rice had been spotted all suited up and ready to go during warm-ups, at least initially, that the scene and the sighting of Monty Rice in crutches became a very weird deal for a lot of people to see. And so Kirby Smart was asked after the game, hey, what happened with Monty Rice? It looked like he was about to play, and then all of a sudden we saw him in crutches. And Kirby Smart delivered the bad news.
Yeah, he got hurt during warm-ups. Not sure to what extent, how bad it is. He was just planting and driving. He planted and drove, and he said his foot was bothering him. And so we had to go do x-rays, and I'm not sure the complete verdict, but he was ruled out for the game.
Let me just say, obviously, what has to be said here. Luck is a part of football, for the good and for the bad. And you want to talk about just the most rotten, stinking, lousy luck. A guy gets hurt during warm-ups, and I think there'll probably always be the temptation to say, well, how are you going to let a linebacker get hurt during warm-ups? What are you doing during your warm-ups that caused that to happen? There's just luck. I mean, luck is a part of this thing we call college football, and sometimes it works in your favor, sometimes it doesn't. This is one of those moments where, depending on how bad this turns out to be, and as I speak here, it's just after 10 a.m., on a Monday morning, Kirby Smart will address the media at noon. For those of you watching it live, that's coming up later on. For those of you who check out this show as an on-demand feature or maybe on the radio later on with our friends in Athens, you may have already known now what we don't know about Monty Rice's injury. Kirby Smart's going to be talking about this, but if this ends up being more serious than not, when you think about what Georgia could have the rest of the way, that becomes a pretty significant blow for Georgia not to have Monty Rice. Although, let's wait and see what the prognosis is, and let's also add that the other linebackers, apart from Monty Rice, Kirby Smart says he believes in those guys too.
Yeah, confidence in all our players. I mean, why would I not have confidence in in our players. They practice every day. I mean, I got confidence in Quay and Channing Tindall. I mean, it's what coaches do. They show confidence in players and put them out there and give them an opportunity to play.
Yeah, so I've always believed that the most interesting linebacker matchup that Georgia might be able to have is a guy like Monty Rice maybe teaming up with someone like Quay Walker and Channing Tindall, something along those lines, so that you could get one of those speedy guys in there with a big thumper like Monty Rice to stop the run. So that's obviously what I've always felt like was Georgia's potential best tandem there when it comes to those inside linebackers. But for now, Georgia fans will hold their breath to find out what the status for Rice ends up being. Let me also remind you that DawgNation Daily's Around the Doghouse feature is presented by Pella Window and Door. And Pella Window of Door of Georgia can help you equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. They're family-owned and operated with a branch right here in Georgia, which means you get local service backed by a national company, and they're going to give you a great offer right now. You can currently get 50% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for 48 months. That's valid through the end of the year, so you got to go right now. Take advantage of that great offer because Pella offers the best lifetime warranty with top-of-the-line equipment and unparalleled expertise. So you can schedule your free home consultation a couple of different ways. You can check them out online at pellasoutheast.us. The website, once again, pellasoutheast.us, or you can give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. That number, once again, 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best. It's great to have with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We'll hear from Kirby Smart later on, his thoughts about what I thought was a pretty impressive day for Georgia quarterback Justin Fields. For now, though, on more of everything that happened in a victorious Georgia locker room on Saturday night, let's talk to our buddy Chip Towers here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, busy time here for Georgia, dispatching of UMass, if not always perfectly on the defensive side of the ball, looking ahead to Georgia Tech, and then you know what, coming up after that. I'm going to do my best not to say the A word too much on the program this week because I do think the Tech rivalry and clean old-fashioned hate deserves its day in the sun for a few days. So I'm going to try my best not to say Alabama too much this week, but I'm sure it'll pop in from time to time. How could it not with the SEC championship looming? Let's say hello to Chip Towers here on this Thanksgiving week. And Chip, thanks for being with us on the program today. We appreciate your time. How you doing?
Hey, fantastic. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Let me start with where I was just on, the subject I was on right before you joined us. That's the injury to Monty Rice, the linebacker, as you were kind of talking about in the press box like everybody else was. We don't see him during the game after having seen him during warm-ups. Then we see him on crutches. That's a confusing situation. A lot of Georgia fans were trying to figure out what was going on that as well. Then you find out it's a foot injury, as Kirby Smart explained to you guys in the post-game press conference. I guess this is one of those things when Kirby speaks to the reporters later on today around noon. I know you'll be there. This is going to be another subject you get an update from on Kirby Smart because when you look at what Georgia has the rest of the way in terms of stopping the run, Chip, I just believe that Monty Rice is Georgia's best run-stopping linebacker. Having him or not having him will make a big degree of difference in terms of Georgia's likelihood of having success on defense.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I think it's a completely a worst-case scenario for Georgia to lose Monty Rice possibly right before you play Georgia Tech, because it's not so much as it's not really just the the run stuffing ability as it is kind of the sideline to sideline ability. That's what the challenge that you get with Georgia Tech is they spread you out so much in the run game. And if you just go back a year ago, to Roquan Smith, and again, nobody's suggesting that Monty Rice is Roquan Smith or any of those linebackers are, but just look at the game that Roquan Smith had. He was a sideline to sideline linebacker, and so that's what Monty Rice brings to the table that I think a lot of the other guys that are in there playing perfectly well as linebackers, they just don't have the range that Roquan had or that Monty Rice had. So, there's a couple of scenarios here. One, we'll find out today that he's okay, but he's still hurting a little bit. Or two, he's not okay. And either one of them's not great. I mean, it was bad enough that you scratched him when he was completely dressed out for the game. And that could have been, hey, you got a little twinge, let's not take any chances. We're getting ready to play UMass, so go ahead and take a seat over there. Or, it was, a serious injury. I mean, anytime you're talking about something to your foot, yeah, it could be a sprain, but most of the time, those tend to linger a little while.
Yeah, that's I think a fair point. You mentioned UMass. Let me talk about that for a moment. Obviously, from that game in a fishbowl all of itself, the biggest storyline is the fact that Isabella, the really good-looking wide receiver from UMass, just went wild, more than 200 yards receiving. I guess, Chip, there are a couple different ways to look at this, and I'm curious to find out where you land. On the one hand, when you project ahead to a team like Alabama, I've always felt like the most underrated aspect of the Crimson Tide was its wide receivers. As good as Tua is right now, I don't think the wide receivers and their ability to help Tua gets mentioned enough, and I thought going into last year's national championship game, the wide receiving core, even with what I thought was an inferior quarterback in Jalen Hurts as the starter, I still thought those receivers were a dangerous matchup for Georgia. You know, as a maybe foreshadowing of that, giving up a bunch of yards to a UMass receiver obviously makes that situation not look too good. And yet, on the other hand, Georgia's been in kind of a physical stretch over the last few weeks. They've really battled to win the SEC East. Maybe a more finesse-style game in which they gave up some yards and points but probably didn't have to trade paint too much there at the line of scrimmage. Maybe that was just what Georgia needs, given the fact that it's going to play some really physical, competitive football over the next few weeks. On which side of that coin do you come with Georgia giving up some points and yards to UMass?
Well, you know, in my report card this week, Brandon, I gave Georgia a D on defense. You know, I thought it was very poor. I mean, I don't care if it's Andy Isabella or if it's Jerry Rice. I mean, the point is to defend them and to prevent them from gaining yardage or catching the ball. Now, certainly a lot of what UMass does is very controlled with Andy Isabella, but so a lot of Georgia fans kind of got after me, on Twitter and stuff about my grade report and saying, yeah, he had 219 yards, but most of that came in the second half against the second team, and that's not really true. I mean, Eric Stokes, your starting cornerback, was in the game when he scored the long touchdown. Yeah, it was a double pass, but you're supposed to defend the double pass. It doesn't matter who's in there. They're all wearing the red and black. It's not like that. So you're going to quit in the second half. All those guys play for you, and they had. The bottom line is UMass had 209 yards or something offense in the first half. That was all against the starting defense. So I think it's some issues, and you're right. Alabama's wide receivers. I don't think Georgia should be necessarily fearful of Alabama's run game. I mean, it is formidable, probably the most formidable, close to the most formidable that Georgia will have played with Damian Harris and those other guys. But the reality is their receivers are the issue. I mean, their ability to throw the ball downfield is the issue. And I'm sitting here looking at this and I'm thinking, Alabama's probably has some stuff similar to what Andy Isabella was doing. They probably have some athletes similar to what Andy Isabella was doing. And if they didn't, I think they're going to put it in before Georgia plays them. So, it is what it is. There's nowhere to hide. The 27 points were real points. The 219 yards were real yards. They were in a sanctioned football game against an FBS opponent. So, yeah, that's a concern.
I want to talk to you about Justin Fields in a moment. Before that, though, let me remind DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers that Black Friday early deals continue at your local Atlanta Kroger. There's 10 days of your best savings. It's now through November 23rd. It's toys, home goods, cookware, and so much more. So check out your Atlanta area Kroger for a lot of those Black Friday sales that last for even more than Black Friday. Savings going on here for 10 days there at your local Atlanta Kroger. I was really impressed with what I saw from Justin Fields on Saturday, Chip, and I guess as a way of putting it succinctly, I think he proved on Saturday that the skill set we all presumed that he had in high school, he was capable of showing that, as you said, against a real FBS-level opponent. He was capable of showing some of that. It's a long way before we'll know if he's ever going to live up to all the hype that he has as what was one of the 2 or 3 top players in the entire country for the class of 2018. But it is certainly a prodigious skill set, and I think there's a lot of fascination moving forward for just exactly how Georgia's going to use it, and I think that Fields' performance on Saturday only adds to that curiosity.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that happened on Saturday was the psychological, and confidence improvements that Justin Fields is going to take out of the game. And again, you have to you put everything in perspective. That I guess was probably the worst defense that Georgia has played all year. I mean, that was an incredible performance. I think Georgia might have averaged 11 yards a play or something like that. I mean, it was unbelievable what Georgia was able to do on offense. And Justin Fields was impressive in every way, shape, and form. 100 yards rushing, and then you see this all the time. We've seen this as reporters in practice when you watch Justin Fields. We've talked about it all year. It's like that arm is just just as elite as you get, and you saw that on the long pass to Mecole Hardman, and all of that has got to help him exponentially when it comes to certainly to confidence and in his own abilities. But it has to be put in perspective. The defense that Georgia's going to see in the SEC championship game is not going to resemble anything that we saw this past Saturday. Now, Georgia Tech might a little bit. Georgia Tech's not a very good. Georgia Tech's not a very good defense, and that's what I like about Georgia in this game. You hadn't asked me about Tech yet, but obviously these guys run the football better than anybody else in the country, but their defense is very, very second level, second tier is what I mean to say, and they're going to have to score with Georgia. I think that's the storyline on this game, and so that's the good news. And Justin Fields, how much is he a part of it? Is going to be interesting to see because the coaches are breaking down that film and they're going to decide how much of Justin Fields do we now, invoke into the play script, into the game plan going forward. And that's going to be an interesting sidebar, kind of to the whole Georgia Tech conversation.
And I do want to talk to you more about the Jackets coming up in a moment. Let me squeeze in one more thing before we get there, though. You gave your game ball on Saturday to Tyler Simmons. Simmons has a big rush and a big reception in this game, and you alluded to confidence a moment ago. Justin Fields may be gaining some with his performance. I think for a lot of Georgia players, the UMass game, as much of a pushover as it was, might be a confidence boost for a lot of UJ players. And this is one of those moments where I think that Kirby Smart, Chip, does something pretty smart. No pun intended, in that, he empties his bench in a game like this. He'll get Tyler Simmons involved in the offense early. He tried to get Demetrius Robertson a touchdown and almost did. You wrote about this. I guess they played 70-something players, almost 80 players in the game. I think that Kirby's pretty good about knowing that cycling in these substitutes in and out, getting guys involved, making everybody feel like they get the chance to get the picture taken with the uniform on out there on the field, that has a way of boosting morale a little bit, right?
Yeah, no, I think he does a great job of that overall. Whether it be to keep, spirits up or to keep reps down, it's working on both counts. And, Tyler Simmons a great game. Funny little sidebar to that. The reason I gave Tyler Simmons the game ball and not to Justin Fields was that Mike Griffith had already committed to writing a Justin Fields piece. After he went kind of berserk early on, he's like, I'm gonna go ahead and get a Justin Fields story going. So it's like, and of course he hadn't done everything he'd done in the game quite at that point. And Tyler Simmons had already had 2 touchdowns at that point. And I said, okay, I think I'm going to go with the game ball on Tyler Simmons. But it was, you talk about a while ago, you alluded to Alabama's wide receiver core. I honestly think when we get to the end of this, and maybe when we look back years later at Georgia's wide receiver core, we're going to look back with a lot of respect of the level of players that Georgia had and the depth of players that Georgia, quality depth, that Georgia had with their wide receivers, between Tyler Simmons, Mecole Hardman, Riley Ridley, all these guys, Terry Godwin. A lot of these guys are going to be playing on the next level. I feel confident, so much so that Demetrius Robertson can't even hardly find his way on the field. And God bless him, not being able to haul in that one touchdown pass that was right on the money, right between the mitts. And I know they're trying hard and working hard to get him involved, and he was just able to come back from an injury. So that was disappointing. But some great wide receiver play. And Tyler Simmons, not just a blocker. That guy can run and he can catch the ball as well.
One of the things we talked about before you joined us was, and Kirby Smart's alluded to this a lot, hey, we practice for upcoming opponents. He'll say that during the summer. He'll say that right during the bye week. He'll say that leading up almost to game week on the first week of the season. Cameron Isaac told us on the Northside Hospital postgame show that that's Georgia Tech. They're preparing for Georgia Tech a little bit each week. Kirby told you guys in the postgame press conference, no, it's not quite every week because we got too much other stuff to do, but they're clearly paying attention to the triple option offense a lot during the year to lead up to the game against Georgia Tech. Based on your best understanding, kind of how does that go, Kirby Smart's preparation before game week to make sure they're ready come game week for what the Yellow Jackets bring to the table?
Well, one thing that they do every single practice all year, they devote a period to, is cut blocking in defense. And it's so they have everybody on the defensive line, the linebackers and the defensive back, they have a cut blocking drill where it's how to defend against the cut block, and they do that every I don't know how many it says. I think 5 minutes, 1 5-minute period in every practice. Now, during off weeks and certainly in weeks when you're preparing for somebody like UMass, they devote more than that to it. They devote some strategic periods to it. And then all the time, as Kirby has added exponentially to Georgia's support staff. They have people working on certain opponents all year long. Like, in other words, there's a group of support staff that is assigned Georgia Tech early in the year, and their job all year long is to pay attention to what Georgia Tech is doing, charting tendencies, charting strengths and weaknesses. This is what we got to play. So they're long plan into what they're going to do against Georgia Tech. And I would imagine yesterday the coaching staff is way far down the line on what they want to put in, which will be today with the actual implementation of the game plan, how they're going to attack them. So it's kind of true anyway, no matter who the coach is. But I promise you cannot out prepare Kirby Smart. I mean, this is part of the process. Quotes around that. There's a very strategic template that starts with Nick Saban that he used for years, that they use on preparing for opponent, and they've been doing that for the better part of the entire calendar year for Georgia Tech.
If you don't mind me squeezing in one quick final question, Chip, and you're always so generous with your time, but I want to get your thoughts on this. I believe that one of the interesting storylines this week is going to be the fact that Tech has won 2 straight against Georgia in Athens. Georgia's won every game in Atlanta dating back to 1999, but Tech's got a 2-game winning streak in Athens. I have a tendency to assume that's going to come up a lot with both media, players, and fans, that Georgia trying to end that streak, Tech trying to continue it. That's going to end up being the focal point for all the attention this week.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no question. Look, the last 2 times that Georgia Tech was here, they absolutely ravaged the hedges. And I noticed this morning Ken Segura, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, was quoting their wide receiver Brad Stewart, who says it was a great feeling carrying those hedges at the end of that game, and I want to do it again. And there's nothing that gets Georgia fans more fired up than their sacred hedges, and their intention is to come tear them up again. So I don't know how much that Kirby and his staff will be showing video of hedges getting torn up, but I imagine that's going to be a lot. And look, that's a big part of the motivation here. I mean, it's protecting your turf, and Georgia has a wall dedicated on the first floor of the Betts-Mare football complex to the teams over the years who have been undefeated at home. And there's no coincidence, Brandon, that those teams mostly ended up in either SEC championships or national championships or played for them. It's about protecting your home turf, and this is Georgia's last opportunity to do that. These seniors are going out 42 wins. I think they've had 42 wins. These seniors have had. This is a proud group, and they're not going to want to go out with another loss to Georgia Tech. That'll be a big part of I'm sure the motivation of the Bulldogs this week.
Chip, that is terrific insight. I really appreciate you taking some time to share that really, really interesting look ahead to Tech on Saturday. We'll look forward to reading a bunch from you at DawgNation.com this week. You're really a historian when it comes to clean old-fashioned hate. You've seen a lot of these over the years, and, of course, we'll check in with you again soon as we turn our attention to the SEC Championship next week. Thanks for being with us. We'll talk to you later on.
All right. See you, bud.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I thought that was really interesting from Chip Towers there at the end about not just beating Georgia Tech to end what has been a 2-game losing streak to the Jackets in Athens, but also preserving an undefeated mark at home. And if you want to go back a couple of years ago to the 2016 team that lost to Georgia Tech and the 2014 team near the end of the Richt era that also lost to Georgia Tech, as Chip kind of points out, it wasn't just Georgia Tech. That Georgia had this horrible habit for a while, and that's all you can say. It's what it was. Had a horrible habit of losing home games. Georgia had this stretch for a while where they were just dropping home games left and right, giving up big yards, giving up big point totals, giving up games at home. And as Chip said, the very baseline foundation for being a championship-level football team is you got to win your home games. The road games are tough enough as it is. You got to find yourself some easy wins at home, and Georgia for a while has given up, for a while had just been giving up a bunch of home wins. Hail Mary to Tennessee, for goodness sakes. The two to Georgia Tech in 2014 and 16. I mean, those are just games that championship teams cannot lose. Well, guess what? Here we are in November of 2018, and Georgia is about to, if it can take care of Georgia Tech on Saturday, go through a stretch where it's gone undefeated at home 2 consecutive years. That ain't so bad, and that's the kind of thing that you can really go to work with if you're Georgia. Another one of these marks that Kirby Smart has greatly improved in his brief time on the job. And as Chip just said, a lot of these Georgia seniors who've already accomplished so much, preserving that mark and ending that blemish against Georgia Tech will be a big part of that action. All right, I told you that I didn't want to talk too much about Alabama on today's show or this week in general. I want to focus on Georgia Tech, but I do need to make you aware of one thing. It's next Thursday, the Thursday before the SEC Championship game. This is next week, next Thursday. DawgNation going to be back at the Marlows in Brookhaven. Really excited about that. It's 6 to 8 p.m. next Thursday, November 29th, at the Marlows in Brookhaven. Let me give you the address. I want you to write this down if you're not watching on video. It's 3575 Durden Drive. 3575 Durden Drive. The Marlows in Brookhaven for our DawgNation Big Game Preview. Really happy to announce that our buddy John Stinchcomb is coming back. It's our big look ahead to the SEC Championship. John Stinchcomb, who was a part of the first ever Georgia team to win an SEC Championship, going to be telling stories about that one and his thoughts on how the Dogs get it done against the Crimson Tide. That's next Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m., Marlows in Brookhaven for our DawgNation Big Game Preview. Last year, and I want to do the SEC through, so let me just be very quick about this. But walking up to Marlows last year for our DawgNation Big Game Preview before last year's SEC Championship and seeing the entire parking lot, it just so happens we were in Brookhaven, but seeing the entire parking lot filled with cars, all of them that had their car flags on like they were tailgating before a game. That's one of my great memories of 2017, and the Big Game Preview heading into this year's title game next Thursday is going to be just as big, so we'll see the Marlows in Brookhaven with John Stinchcomb next Thursday at 6 p.m. All right, with that said, let's do some SEC through stuff here. And I do realize that a lot of you probably don't care that much about what happened against Vanderbilt and Ole Miss. I do understand that. Maybe you should, though. Let me tell you why. At the end of the game, Ole Miss has a chance to win on what looked to be a touchdown, beautiful one-handed catch by A.J. Brown. It was then overturned on replay as an incomplete pass. It could have almost been an interception, but it wasn't. So it's kind of a controversial ending. And many of you probably did watch this game or you saw the highlights on the SEC Network. And I don't quite know how to feel about this. I don't know what the room thinks in here as well at our DawgNation World headquarters. I just don't know that this replay is all that conclusive one way or another. Connor Riley says he doesn't think it's a catch. I guess there's a part of me that says I'm not so sure that what Brown did was a catch either. Now, I wish I could play the replay for you, show you the highlights. We're obviously not able to do that. I wish I could do that, but I can't. But here's what I'll say, though. Whether it is a catch or isn't, whether it should be ruled that way or not, it's almost like I want anything that almost looks like a catch to actually be ruled a catch. Because the last thing I want is to get in this scenario where we're in the NFL the last couple of years where nobody knows what a catch is. On this particular play with A.J. Brown, I have no idea if it's a catch or not. But if it seems like it should be a catch, then just go ahead and make it a catch, because the last thing I want to do is start debating, catches and football moves and all that junk. And as Chris Doring, our buddy, pointed out on the SEC Network on Saturday night, the frustrating thing is if you're a running back and you just put the ball over the goal line, that's enough for a touchdown. Why do we treat catches as so much more precious and so much more easily overturn than a running back who all he has to do is cross the goal line. I thought that was a pretty good point there. By the way, Ross Bjork does weigh in on this, the Ole Miss AD. I'll show you his tweet where basically what he does is acknowledge to the Ole Miss fans that he didn't think it was a good call. And honestly, this is not whining. This is not belly aching. This is not crying. This is just saying to the rest of Rebel Nation, wherever they call it, that we felt like it was a bad call. We told the SEC office, and now we're moving on. I actually think that's a pretty classy response from Bork under the circumstances, and I don't mind him going public with his dissatisfaction. I think it's important for a fan base to know the AD's got the programs back, and he's not just some shill for the SEC. So I think from that standpoint, what Bjork does is a pretty good thing for Ole Miss. Let me move on to a couple other stories quickly, even though our SEC through music has completely run out. I thought that a Citadel coach said something very interesting about Alabama postgame. Once again, if you're watching on video, I'll show you this tweet, and if not, I'll read it to you. Colton Korn, who I don't know what position he coaches for Citadel, he's just one of their assistants, he says, and I'm quoting, "It needs to be said, thanks to the 3 or 4 Alabama football players and maybe 1/4 of the coaches for coming across and showing some respect after the game on Saturday." He says, "I'm blown away after a game like that, one in which the Citadel played close earlier. There isn't mutual respect." Ooh, how about that phrase? Proud to be an underdog, proud to be a Bulldog. I think that's really interesting from Colton Korn. Now, some people kind of responded back to his tweet and said they're basically celebrating a moral victory. It is a moral victory when you play Alabama close for a while. If the players can't come over and shake hands and can't come over and say good game, then that's a bad job by them. And I don't mind Colton Korn calling him out for that. All right, let me rattle through a couple other stories here real quick. Tennessee gets blown out on Saturday. The Georgia recruits were on hand to see that. We talked about this on Friday. Nolan Smith and Trayvon Walker and Tresman Marshall. I can't imagine they had too good of a time, which is exactly what Georgia fans were hoping for. Emory Jones, by the way, played a pretty good bit against for Florida on Saturday against Idaho. He actually had pretty good numbers, so kind of interesting to see Jones getting involved. And Kansas has hired Les Miles. So a lot going on there around the SEC. We'll make that your SEC through, and we'll talk more with Jeff Sintel tomorrow about exactly what happened with those UGA recruits on hand for Tennessee. And Jaden Hazelwood's time at Florida State. We'll do a lot of that with Jeff Sintel tomorrow as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. I know one of the things that y'all want to do, though, is get back to this discussion of the Georgia Bulldogs. So here on DawgNation Daily, let's do that right now. We had a chance to talk to Chip Towers a little earlier about the performance of Justin Fields against UMass. Weak opponent, you'll grant that, but he made some throws on Saturday. In addition to the fact that he becomes the first Georgia quarterback since Quincy Carter to rush for 100 yards. Some of the throws that Fields had on Saturday were, I mean, listen, there aren't a lot of quarterbacks living on the planet who can make some of the dimes. If I'm 41 years old, allowed to even use that word. Some of the just the bullets that he threw deep down the field. Not a lot of quarterbacks can do what he did. With that in mind, he'll be our R.S. Andrews cool under pressure performer of the week. Probably not a ton of pressure against that Minutemen defense, but Justin Fields was certainly cool. And after the game, Kirby Smart said, listen, y'all saw him do this against UMass, but even in some of those weeks in which he wasn't playing a lot, we still saw him doing a lot of that stuff behind closed doors in practice. Here's how Kirby Smart said that.
I see that game every day. I mean, I see him go out there and do good things with the ball. He makes good decisions. He's getting better with his vision downfield and making decisions with the ball quicker. So he continues to grow and get better. But that's not a surprise to me because I see him do that a lot in practice.
Listen, for a long time, the stat that's been out there is that about half of the five-star quarterback, the real blue-chip quarterbacks, about half of them end up being bust. Now, it's not quite half anymore because of the rise of 7-on-7, the fact that high school offenses have just gotten more sophisticated. Quarterbacks actually enter college now more prepared than they used to be. But nonetheless, there's always going to be a pretty significant pocket of quarterbacks that just don't pan out. I think what Justin Fields has proven, even playing only sporadically, I think what he's proven in 2018 is he is not in the bust category. He is one of these quarterbacks that's going to be good enough to play. And it only remains to be seen how good he actually is. Does he truly live up to the hype as being one of the 2 or 3 best players in the country? We'll have to wait to find that out. We know as things stand right now, he's already pretty good. In fact, he's our R.S. Andrews Cool Under Pressure Performer of the Week. And speaking of R.S. Andrews, frosty mornings, we've had a lot of those here lately. They bring a smile to your face when you get a R.S. Andrews furnace checkup. Their trained techs are clean and on time and drive beyond ordinary furnace checkups. R.S. Andrews inspects your heat exchanger for leaks, checks your filters, your flue, your vent, and so much more. You can get your system back to factory fresh specs, and it's all just $99. So call R.S. Andrews, the heating and cooling, plumbing, electrical pros that Dog Nations trust, or log on to rsandrews.com today. Okay, so it's a lot on clean old-fashioned hate this week, and as I said, I'm going to do my part not to say too much about Alabama this week. I want to focus in on Georgia Tech and what's going to happen there. Don't want to say too much about the Crimson Tide until next week. But even though we're talking about clean old-fashioned hate and jackets, that doesn't mean we ever stop talking about Florida and the happiness that dog fans enjoy, knowing it's been 751 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have had anything to brag about against the Georgia Bulldogs. It's been that long since Florida's gotten a win against Georgia. That's a number that we look forward to seeing climb more and more and more in the days, months, and years ahead. And speaking of those rivalry streaks, Georgia looking forward to putting another one together against Georgia Tech on Saturday. And I was happy to hear Cameron Isaacs' words in the Northside Hospital postgame show on Saturday night that we played for you here this morning. But yeah, Kirby, he feels about this rivalry game the way that you hoped that he would, and we'll look forward to seeing the game on Saturday and seeing you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. Happy Thanksgiving week to all of you. Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate that. We will dive in and get as many of your comments as we can and wrestle with everything going on around Dog Nation here today, as it is a busy, busy time. And with that said, David Hamansky says that Justin Fields gets hit a lot. He does. He takes some big shots. He took a big shot, a big old shot on that Riley Ridley touchdown throw. But here's another thing that's kind of valuable about Fields. And I'm not saying that every time he gets hit, I'm like, ooh, ugh. I get a little nervous about every one of those. But he is a big guy. What is he, about 230 pounds or so? 220, 230, something like that? I mean, part of having that frame that Fields brings to the table is the fact that you can absorb hits a little more. I mean, football's a physical game. And there is a risk with being a quarterback who does what Fields does. As cool as it is to see him lower his shoulder, at one point in time, he just kind of put his head down and, try to run over a guy, for the most part did. There's a part of me that wants to say, Justin, that's awesome. I love doing that. As much as I'm allowed to in the press box, I get really excited when I see a Georgia quarterback do that. Maybe just go out of bounds. Maybe don't show us on every single play just how much you appreciate physicality and want that to be a part of your game. Maybe don't always feel like you have to do that. But I think for the most part, he's pretty good at being able to absorb those blows. Joey Smiley along the same line says, did Fields get banged up a little on Saturday? It seemed like he was limping a little bit, and then he ran down the sideline like a beast. Yeah, on that one long run, it seemed like he almost ran out of gas. I thought it was kind of weird. I don't know if he got tired or what. And, it seemed like there were a couple times when he was a little hobbled. I think all of us view him as such a premier prospect, and Fromm would be the same way. Fromm, I guess, gets hit a little less than Fields does just by the nature of the way they play the position. But I think we notice every single moment when it seems like Fields is even the least bit ginger, because I think all of us are conditioned to think, quarterbacks are fragile. The way the game is called by the officials this day leads you to believe that. Drew Roman feeling good about Jaden Hazelwood now. Yeah, Hayes was at Florida State on Saturday. Knowles, I guess, pull off the upset against Boston College. Isn't that right? Didn't Florida State beat Boston College on Saturday? So that's a pretty good win for the Noles. I don't believe Jaden Hazelwood's going to Florida State. I don't. I may be very disappointed come December, and I may lead some of y'all down the wrong path too. And I guess we won't hear from Hazelwood till January. But I of the schools that we hear as the likely suitors for Hazelwood, I'm not really buying any of them. My fear on Hazelwood is always going to be that some surprise team, as Lee Corso used to say, sneaks around the chicken coop. I'm a little worried about something like that more so than anything else. But of the teams that we hear about, I don't think Hazelwood's going to any of those. Chris Gainey says Justin Fields is scary good. Yeah, I mean, look, for a long time, we didn't really see. I mean, it seemed like for football for a long time, you were one or the other. You either had the cannon arm or you had the lightning quickness that made you running quarterback. That, for whatever reason, we didn't see that running quarterback who seemed to possess that just unbelievable God-given arm strength. And then Michael Vick came along, and all of a sudden you saw it was possible when a guy combined both of those elements. And, you know, Vick has a good career, but probably not as good a career as he could have had. But since then, though, it's almost like Vick kind of blew the ceiling off with what the quarterback position can be. You know, it paves the way for other guys who also have the big arms and the incredible legs, the incredible, you know, skill and strength in both those regards. So when you say that Fields is scary good, there is an extent to which he kind of is that, because I know for opposing defenses, what do you do? What do you do when a guy can keep a play alive with his legs and then make a throw as accurate and as deeply as Fields is capable of doing? That is almost a, do you want to die slow? Do you want to die fast? I mean, that's the position that Fields puts opposing defenses in. Michael Weir says, and by the way, checking in from the D.C. area. Thanks for checking in, Michael. He says, do you think the zone chop blocking that Tech does impacts who we have on the line that Georgia's going to play this week? I don't know that it impacts personnel decisions. I do think that what Chip Towers mentioned a moment ago about, you know, that's something that Georgia practices against. Because, listen, if you're a defensive player, you can't help but think a little bit about that. That's your livelihood. That's your future on the line. You don't want to have a knee taken out from you. You know, for Tech, who can't recruit the big mauling offensive lineman the way that Georgia can, they want to play physical as well. They can't necessarily go, you know, toe-to-toe, mano-a-mano, so that's the way they go about doing it. I don't fault them for wanting to play physical in the manner that suits them, but it is the kind of thing that Georgia's got to be ready for, and it sounds like Georgia, you know, during its practices does some stuff to help doing that. Mark Cochran says, I think the only thing that Fields is going to have an issue with are his short passes because his arm is so strong. That bomb looked effortless. I understand where you're coming from. I thought he showed a good bit of touch on the Ridley throw, though, especially given the fact that he had, given the fact that he had, you know, pressure coming and he took a big hit the moment he let the football go. There was also one moment right before the deep throw to Hardman where he could have thrown an interception to when he was trying to dump off to, I think it was DeAndre Swift. He also could have gotten Swift hurt because it seemed like he kind of, you know, put Swift in harm's way at least a little bit with the way that he threw the football. And as I told somebody, if you're a quarterback coach, you can teach him not to make a bad short throw, but you can't teach a less gifted quarterback how to make that deep of a throw. I mean, to be in the building and watch that throw to a Hardman, maybe I'm making too much about it. I just thought that was otherworldly. I really did. And like I said, maybe I'm exaggerating it a little bit, but I thought it was really pretty impressive. Don Williams says, wait till these guys grow up some. And I do believe to an extent that's true. And it's kind of funny that not everything works out in life the way you think it's going to. But this is an example of something that has worked out the way that many of us thought it would. We thought that Georgia would get better over the course of a season, and we thought that Georgia would showcase a lot of young players who you'd be constantly thinking about, how good's he going to be 12 months from now or even 24 months from now? And on both sides of the ball, I do think Georgia's got a lot of those kinds of guys. So, yeah, right now, not only do I feel really good about where Georgia is for the rest of this season, I also feel like that the future, 2019, 2020, 2021, you know, you get into a span of time where the years are a little more difficult to say. They don't even sound like years, it seems so far into the future. But when you start looking ahead to those years, I do think Georgia's looking pretty good right now, folks. I really do. AM Fitness on YouTube says the throw to Hardman was an NFL Aaron Rodgers-like throw. Fields to the Falcons in 3 years to replace the aging noodle arm Matt Ryan. I'll leave the Matt Ryan debate to a different show, but Fields in a Falcons uniform. I know a lot of Dog fans would probably really enjoy that. Ninja the Noob says, turn up the volume, please, on DawgNation Daily. Then stop always going to Facebook first and giving them 2/3 of the discussion time. Now, Ninja, be fair. On Friday, we started our comment section on YouTube. Now, be fair. Although if the volume's too low, let us know. K9 Blue says, BA, do you like having Tech staying on our schedules? The gap between the two teams continues to increase. So what I've said is that I would be in favor of Georgia and Georgia Tech no longer playing. I am going to do my part this week to celebrate this rivalry because it's what many of you want to do. And I think if I talk too much with the SEC championship this week, y'all be mad at me. And for a lot of people, the Georgia Tech game remains very important, especially I think the older. I think there's kind of a line of demarcation where if you're my age or older, Tech means a lot because you're a lot more likely to remember back when Tech mattered. I think for people who are younger, I don't think this game means very much at all. In 2029, as it stands right now, Georgia's slated to play Clemson and Texas in the same season. I'm assuming Georgia Tech too. I'd much rather the future beyond that feature a lot more games against, power programs like Texas and Clemson than Georgia Tech. I mean, you're already going to hear Kirby Smart this week. He's going to be begging fans to come to the game. If Georgia was playing Clemson, you wouldn't be begging any fans to come. They'd be, begging to get tickets themselves. So, this is one of those things where there'll be a lot of talk this week about how important the Georgia Tech rivalry is to many people, but the talk is not always proven by actions. There'll be empty seats in Athens on Saturday. There were empty seats in Atlanta last year. That this is just not that big of a game anymore. Bobby Dodd is a long time since having been Tech coach, and the time in which Georgia viewed Tech as a program on par with itself is also a long time since past as well. Georgia does have some business to take care of because Tech has won in Athens recently, as we've pointed out. But when you start looking further into the future, as the commenter just mentioned, there's a huge gap between these two programs. Don't even go up to the same kind of players now. The gap would appear to only be growing. Enrique Murillo brings up an interesting point. And like I said, I want to talk about Tech this week and try to hold off on the Alabama stuff as long as I can. But he says if Bama loses the SEC championship game, still gets in the playoff, and somehow wins it again, we need to get rid of the championship game because it's obsolete with the committee. I think that's a really interesting point. And I say that as someone who's a huge fan of the SEC championship. I think it's one of the coolest things in sports. I just have always loved it. I'll always love it. I can remember how big of a deal it was for me the first time Georgia qualified to go there, and it's always felt big every year after that. And so another reason why I would probably argue against Alabama making the playoff were it to lose the SEC championship game is the fact that it would further devalue something that I don't want to see devalued. I want the SEC championship to matter. I think Enrique's bringing up a pretty good point there. Georgia fan asked, is Tua Jr. good? I think he means, is it Talia, as he say his name? I don't know if he's quite the same prospect that that Tua is. Tramp Dickerson says. Earlier I said that I'm going to try not to say to Alabama too much, and Tram's also, I guess, following in those footsteps as well. He says, assuming the Alabama to make the playoff after having lost the SEC championship game, he says we should get 2 natties if we got to beat, and he says B ... He's trying not to type Bama this week, which I appreciate. Tram kind of keeping the focus where it needs to be on that, and I don't necessarily disagree with his point either. Troy Tucker says, any recruiting news? Troy, we'll have Jeff on tomorrow. I know that though there was some chatter coming out of Tresman Marshall's visit to Tennessee, and a lot of the message boards have talked about this, where I think he essentially, and I didn't see the quotes, but I think he essentially insinuated again what he'd already told Jeff Sentell on DawgNation a couple of weeks ago, that he told Jeff around the time of the Florida game that he had essentially 3 schools he was applying to: Georgia, Auburn, and Tennessee. And coming off this Tennessee visit, that's kind of still where his process is. And if you're a Tennessee fan, I think what you'd be disappointed at is you had him on campus, and if you can't change that on the course of this visit, then did you miss your opportunity? That still doesn't mean he's coming to Georgia necessarily. I told y'all on Friday that of all these guys who were taking visits elsewhere this week, Marshall would probably be the one I was the most concerned about. So I think that's not necessarily a done deal as of yet, but it sounds like the board for him is the same place it was around the time that Jeff talked to him, which was just a couple of weeks ago. So we'll keep following that, but that's, I guess, the one little bit of online chatter I have seen, and Jeff will give us a full update on all that when he joins us for our Marlowe's Tavern tell-all on Saturday. JP, he says, wouldn't we still outscore Tech with our offense, even if they score? Still can't win a shootout with them. So I think that JP's kind of right about this. That there is a two-edged deal here, where obviously the Tech offense is pretty good. They're like 13th or 14th in the. I like reading those like advanced stat blogs and doing all that kind of stuff. They're like 13th or 14th in the Football Outsiders offensive efficiency rankings. They've had a pretty good year offensively. Georgia could still, as Chip Towers pointed out, take advantage of what is a Tech defense that's nowhere near as good. But that's not the way Kirby Smart wants to win. And I kind of referenced this myself a moment ago that, Cameron Isaac says that Kirby hates Tech. I believe that Cam's right about that. I'm sure that Kirby, as a Georgia alumnus, probably does. But the thing that Kirby really hates is seeing his defense not be fully ready for everything that an opposing offense could throw out there, whether it be Tech or anybody else. I think that's part of the mission behind the preparedness that Kirby Smart wants to show against Georgia Tech. So as the one commenter mentions, that Georgia very likely, could still win a shootout against Georgia Tech, but that ain't the way that Kirby Smart wants to roll. Let me go back over to Facebook here for a moment. K9 Blues asked an interesting question. It says, BA, how do you feel about increasing the playoffs? How many teams would you like? How would that affect our scheduling? So I think that's a really interesting question. I think I'm probably in favor of an 18 playoff. I think for the most part, the 14 playoffs worked pretty well. It's a huge upgrade on what the sport used to have before the 14 playoff. I think I probably would like an 18 playoff better. And as much as I love the debate of who's going to be in, who's not, I guess I would favor a system that had fewer debates, where you had the Power 5 conference champions earn an automatic berth in, which keeps those championship games feeling very important, and then a debate for the three teams beyond that. And obviously there's going to be a question of, well, does one of those, should that include a group of 5 team like UCF? For me, I don't think there's any reason why the committee should even pretend to care about UCF. I mean, you're going to see this on Tuesday night. We'll actually talk more about this probably tomorrow. There is a chance that UCF, which was 11 last week, Ohio State was 10. Ohio State does not look good against Maryland on Saturday. They got the win, but didn't look good. UCF beats a ranked Cincinnati team, but honestly, to go back to the advanced stats again, Cincinnati may be ranked in the playoff poll, but the advanced stats folks, the math guys, have never had a very favorable opinion of the Bearcats. But be that as it may, UCF probably looks better against a better team, at least in the committee's eyes, than Ohio State. There's a chance that UCF could leapfrog ahead of Ohio State in the rankings. I don't think that will happen, nor do I think it should. There's no way UCF's better than Ohio State, even if they had comparable performances on Saturday. I just don't think that's – I don't think that should even be considered. Over on Facebook, Chad Clark says, should just make winning your conference a requirement and make being in a conference a requirement. Teams like Notre Dame will always play one less game. So I think that's interesting to say, that winning your conference should be a requirement for getting the playoff. I don't necessarily feel that way, because we do see all the time that divisions are not created equal. Take, for instance, Northwestern, which won the Big Ten West and is going to be in the SEC in the Big Ten championship game. That's like at the most a 7-5 team, right there. I think haven't they already lost 5 times? Maybe they may have lost 6. That's a So, were they've earned their way into a conference championship game because they just played in a weak division. So I'm not necessarily in favor of things having to be, you got to win your conference, you got to do this, penalizing team so-and-so didn't even win its division. We have seen, years, go back to the SEC East in the 90s when you had 3 teams in the top 10 in the same division. The SEC West been like that a lot over the last decade. The Big Ten East is probably heavily imbalanced in the Big Ten right now. A couple years ago, the ACC Atlantic had both Florida State and Clemson. It seems like for these conferences that have the divisions, it seems like there's almost always an imbalance in favor of one division over the other. No conference has ever done a good job of creating total parity between its two split halves. So I am not necessarily in favor. I'm actually not in favor at all of making winning your conference being a requirement. In an 8-team world, I wouldn't mind that being some kind of automatic bid, but I still think there ought to be room for at-larges, and they ought to be the true best teams. For instance, I've always felt like if there were 2 teams from the SEC that were truly among the 4 best, or at least consensusly believed, if that's even a word, to be among the 4 best, then they ought to be in there, and that's what happened last year, although there's a strong argument that Alabama should not have been. Emory David Davis says there's no excuse for Ohio State struggles. All those 5 stars and he gives you a poop emoji product on the field. It is bizarre to see that. And I've always been of the belief that Ohio State would probably figure it out and kind of get it back together, probably bounce back, especially after last year where they were underwhelming and somewhat disappointing. I assumed it would get better this season. And really, once again, kind of underwhelming and not really living up to the hype there. I don't quite know what's going on. I joked about this on Saturday. There's a chance that character is just destiny. That when you are a coach who I think has cut corners in terms of your own personal integrity, I think after a while that catches up with your program, the other coaches that you've hired, the way that you've gone about your business. I do think that there is an interest payment that comes due on some of that, and I think we may be seeing that at Ohio State right now. I don't believe that Urban Meyer is a good person. I think that there's some evidence that proves that in the way that he ran the Florida program. I think there's some evidence that proves that in the way that he's run the Ohio State program. And for a lot of fans, if his team or himself personally were to fall in hard times, I think there are a lot of fans who would say it could happen to a nicer person, or a better person. I don't won't pretend to know everything that's gone on there with him or with Ohio State, but I don't like a lot of it. And I think after a while, you can't keep that hid in a closet forever. It bleeds onto the field eventually, and that's what happened. That's what I believe is happening at Ohio State. Scott Harris says, I would hope that the Gus Bus would give Alabama a good game before we play them, but I'm not holding my breath. So there was a time in which I thought that Auburn probably would play Alabama somewhat close. I was of the belief, and this may be nonsense, but I was of the belief that Auburn would either play both Georgia and Alabama close or neither of them close. That if they just, laid down and died against Georgia, then they'd probably just do the same thing against Alabama. If I had to guess, and I haven't even seen the point spread as of yet, but if I had to guess, I'm thinking that Auburn does not want to play Alabama on Saturday. Our buddy Connor Raleigh is a degenerate gambler. You want no part of Auburn on Saturday, correct? Yeah. You're just staying away from the game in particular. But if you had to pick it for like a pool or a pick'em contest or something like that, I mean, do you think that Auburn's packed it in? Yeah, that's kind of what I think too. That, and I'm in complete agreement with the commenter. From a Georgia standpoint, you'd love the idea of Auburn really, really making Alabama go through its paces on Saturday. I think, based on some of the talk coming out of that game against Georgia, it was really weird how negative things have been at Auburn. Based on a lot of that, I think Auburn's packed it in. I don't think they want any part of being there on Saturday, even the seniors. Back over here on YouTube. Cliff Payne says that Georgia's record is more impressive than Michigan's, and it's not close. I wrote about this on Friday. I do think that it's not an overwhelming case, but you can look at all the other top playoff contenders other than Alabama, and you can see a reason why Georgia could maybe be ranked ahead of them or expected to win in a head-to-head situation. I believe that right now the 2 best teams in the country are Alabama and Georgia. And it remains to be seen what's going to happen when those 2 teams play each other. But I do believe right now those are the best 2 teams. So we will see how that goes. But Georgia's obviously got to take care of some business before it gets there. Mike D says that Kirby gave Tim Tebow a black 15 jersey. I didn't see that. The SEC Nation was there on Saturday. Poor Laura Rutledge, who I think is a pretty good broadcaster. She had a kind of a rough moment she got dragged by Uga, and I don't mean like in the metaphorical online sense. She literally got dragged by Uga when she was holding him on a leash, and then got knocked down on the sideline. And I've been hit on a sideline before. It hurts. It absolutely hurts. So looks like she dusted off and got back up pretty quick. But man, that's rough going for Miss Rutledge there. Let me go back over here to Facebook, and then we'll get ready to go. Marcus Bass, talking about that Oklahoma State game, says trying to go for a game-winning 2-point attempt on the Sooners. That Big 12 stuff's been weird all year long. Chris Branham says Clemson's pretty good. That being said, Notre Dame should be number 2. They beat the number 4 team in the country, and I don't even like Notre Dame. It's worth pointing out, though, that the analytics folks and the betting public would all have Notre Dame below Georgia, although resume-wise they did beat Michigan and have remained undefeated, and beat a pretty good Syracuse team on a neutral site this week. Shout out to our boy B.J. Sweeney around here at DawgNation. Was obviously disappointed by that. Chuck Scoggins, I did not know this. Alabama's 24.5-point favorite against Auburn. I guess that makes sense. But, boy, you talk about the Iron Bowl falling on hard times. Unbelievable. Marcus Openshaw, though, says he doesn't think Auburn's just going to lay down for Alabama. They love nothing better than to spoil their perfect season. Obviously, in most cases, most years, Marcus, I believe that last point is true. Auburn would love to spoil that season. I just don't know they believe they're capable of doing that, and so therefore, I just think they want their season to be over with. But I could be wrong. But if I had to pick the Alabama-Auburn side, I don't believe I'm touching Auburn. And I'm a person who even when most people were like Auburn's done, Auburn's finished, I still had some thoughts that Auburn would probably bounce back and play a little bit better. In fact, I thought they'd challenge Georgia a couple of weeks ago and take Georgia into a one-score game, and it just didn't happen. Either Auburn just doesn't quite have the game plan to be able to do that this year, or they've just kind of quit and given up. One way or another, I don't believe they're going to quite show as much fight as we would typically expect from an Iron Bowl. Alec Dickey says, I think that Notre Dame is better than some people think. That they may very well be, and I do believe that there's this belief out there of Notre Dame is always overrated. I think there was a time in which that was probably true. I don't know that Notre Dame is quite what it used to be in terms of national attention that's way outsized in comparison to how good it is. But go back to 2012. Notre Dame was just an average team, right? They were undefeated, so therefore they get to play for the national championship. That would have been an easy win for Alabama, for Georgia. Either one in that game. I think Notre Dame now is on a little bit more solid footing than it would have been back then. I don't think the classic thought of Notre Dame's always overrated. I don't know how true that necessarily is anymore. I think they're clearly one of the 5 or 6 best teams in the country. It's just a matter of how close are they to being number 2. All right, we got to get ready to go here. Thank you all for a really fun time on the show today. We got a good week coming up. I will tell you that it's Thanksgiving on Thursday, so we won't be on video live at 10 a.m. on Thursday. But every other day this week, including Black Friday, we'll be back here at our normal time, and it's going to be a great week of getting ready for clean old-fashioned hate on Saturday, and then Alabama the following week. But we'll keep our attention on the Jackets here this week because we think that's what Georgia wants to do as well. 2 straight that the Jackets have won in Athens. We think the Dogs are going to do something about that come this Saturday at noon. We'll talk to you about it throughout the week. Thanks for being with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Hope you have a great day. And if you can enjoy some time off, enjoy it well, and we'll see you again tomorrow right here at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live.